and those listening via Second Advent Radio. We are delighted to come your way today with another edition of Marriage Encounter. Marriage Encounter is that program that is designed to aid, assist, share ideas and tips on marriage life so that those who are married can have a more meaningful relationship. And also, for those who are not yet married, they can receive good preparatory information. With me on Marriage Encounter today is Pastor Staton Adams. Pastor Adams is the Family Life Director of the South Leeward Conference. And we are going to be continuing a very important discussion dealing with the whole issue of conflict. We started this discussion a few weeks ago, and today we are discussing elements of when you realize that your spouse has an immaturity, when either of you discover that there is some immaturity or brokenness in the other, and how we relate to that. Pastor Adams, good morning and welcome.
Very good morning again, and it is always our delight to be here on Marriage Encounter. And I have been getting some feedback. People are saying that maybe the half an hour is too short. And we probably need to talk some more, but we're glad to be on this morning again, continuing this very important area and that we have started discussing, because depending on how you deal with conflict, it can either improve or further destroy the relationship and even end it, based on my extra reading and research, in addition to what Cloud and Thompson has said. So yes, this is just a very, very crucial. So call somebody, remind them that Marriage Encounter is on and we're ready to go.
That's right. That's right. So if you're able to, just bow your heads with us as we pray. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to share with our friends in Radio Lands and those joining via our YouTube, Facebook channels. We pray that you will grant that the information presented today will prove meaningful in strengthening relationships and building strong, secure marriages. Guide us in our deliberations. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, Pastor Adams, last week we started, well, not started, but continued that important discussion. And when a marriage is impacted by the brokenness or immaturity of a partner, this is a reality. We are not perfect. All of us have imperfections. We come to the marriage relationship with, and you know, we gave that illustration with baggage, and
Yes.
sometimes we discover that there is some garbage in the baggage, and it is going to require a certain degree of maturity to be able to cipher through and to throw out what needs to be thrown out, and go with what is necessary.
Yeah, and I think that somebody spoke to me on that exact point in the week that has passed there, and said probably we should talk some more about that. And we want to remind the viewers, if you didn't hear the two previous presentations, that we are saying that the ownership of the problem or the issue is both personal responsibility, because you have to accept the reality about both yourself and your spouse. You have to accept the reality about what both of you are bringing, because obviously both of you will bring strengths, both of you will bring weaknesses, and it will show up at some time or the other, those weaknesses in each other. And that's why we said you've got to exercise grace, and you've got to approach it not from a perfectionist position, but knowing that when this is a teamwork, and that we have to help each other to grow and mature in the particular area of weaknesses. And if it means intervention, whatever we need to do, if we can't work it ourselves, all of those things are in place. And so I think I should make that point by kind of further extending what we said last week, right? So as you discover those things that you brought in the baggage, those in your boat or your baggages, some of them are good stuff, some of them are stuff that need to be discarded. Those that you can't deal by yourself, just get the help that you need. And nothing is wrong with that, because no marriage, no family is perfect. We all need help at some time. I just want us to get that, because a lot of time people think that, well, maybe it's a sign of weakness. What may people think about us and this marriage and this family? You can't bother with that. You have a commitment to grow this marriage, to make it the best possible relationship and family that you want, and whatever is taking, that commitment must be there.
Most certainly. I like to say, listen, marriage is a partnership. It is a partnership. And if you discover that your spouse has a challenge, then it is a challenge to the marriage. It's not a matter of blaming and saying you are this way and you are that way. This is our problem. We own it and we seek to move forward. I want to use another illustration, Pastor Adams, as good as the baggage illustration is. But if you view your marriage as a garden, when you are working on a garden, naturally, there is going to be the need to pull weeds. You're going to be consistent in pulling the weeds. Otherwise, your garden will become overgrown. And that which you want to benefit from, you're not going to be able to benefit from. And you ought to be able to see the marriage as a couple working together to beautify the area, to pull the weeds, so that you can get your marriage the way you want it to be by the grace of God.
Yeah, and a garden is something, if you want it to bloom and flourish, you have to be constantly paying attention and nurturing. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, since agriculture is part of my, you have some noxious weeds. And noxious weeds mean that those are the dangerous ones. You have some noxious weeds that you don't want to get in the midst of your crops at all. You want to get rid of them soonest. And that's why we want to say, you don't play on something. I think when I was doing the same conflict management, I don't remember which professor, he says that these things must be dealt with. Don't pretend, don't sweep it under the rug. Whoever feels the pinch, call the meeting. Don't wait, don't leave it to fester, because a little thing can that is not dealt with right away could cause a dangerous explosion up the road. So we have to deal with these things, not just confront them and deal with them, but we have to do so in a timely way. Right, just how you have to take care of a garden and take out those noxious weeds in a timely manner, or it will overrun your crop and produce, you will see a different vegetation that you really did not plant.
And as you talk about the noxious weeds, sometimes in marriages, people have a way of just cutting the top off and they leave the root. You have to learn to dig deep and get rid of the root, because those roots with that fiber structure can be doing a lot of damage on the soil. And if your concern is just to clip the surface so that you look good on the outside, you're going to be in trouble later on. So
yeah,
that's
you got to
why
get it out.
it's important
You got to get it out by the root.
That's right. Take your time and deal with the issues. Correct.
And last week, we were going ahead, we mentioned immaturity as one of it, and then we went on to talk about what are some of these realities, and I didn't exactly remember where we stopped. What are some of these realities that we will confront or may confront as we come into this alliance?
That's right. And I suppose we can just look at them, as many as we can cover in the time we have. Again, we take our time on Marriage Encounter because the aim here is not to try to get through so much, but to provide understanding. And I want to make the point, Pastor Adams, I think it's worth repeating, that when we talk about accepting the reality about yourself and your spouse, it is important to know that it is normal and natural that married couples have flaws and faults. So there will be things that you may be unprepared for in your marriage. And some of these that we're going to be talking about, common areas where normal people find that they have brokenness. It may be from some past circumstance, some situation, some immaturity where they are not quite equipped to perform as they should in a relationship. So do understand that if something we say today applies to you, don't feel bad. You're not the only person. These are normal things that normal people encounter on a regular basis.
All right. Last week, I remember that we spoke up to the one that people not completely leaving home, and a man shall leave and cleave. We talked to that one, but I wanted us to go to another one because I've been getting some of these issues of late where parents have tension over the parenting skills, abilities of one versus the other, and how challenging. Matter of fact, yesterday, somebody came to me and requested to see me a certain time and was giving me a kind of a heads up as to what the conversation will be, and it was exactly dealing with this parental ability. One person has this particular method or style versus the other person, and there's a conflict right now in the situation. There's a conflict in the situation. So we have these kind of challenges, the parenting abilities or the parenting strengths, and how does that impact the relationship, even the marriage and the family, well, because of the family as a whole.
It's interesting that you raised that one, Pastor Adams, and that you said you had an experience yesterday, because I'm currently doing a family life revival, and that's the topic I dealt with last night, you know.
Wow.
And so I want to say up front that we don't generally learn parenting at school. We tend to get our parental skills and education from our parents.
Yes.
And given that you are coming from two different homes of origin, you may be exposed to two different parenting styles. And that may create a challenge, which is why in your marital preparation, that is something that needs to be addressed. But we are aware that very often people get married and they don't do the proper preparation. So this is a good area.
And you stress that, I think it was the last one or the one before, the importance of the premarital conflict preparation, because you want to deal with those things since then. You have to talk about children, how many children do we want, and how do we parent them, so you'll be able to pick up whether you are on the same wavelength, because that can cause a lot of problem. And as I dealt with that last week, you were doing your program this week, but I dealt with that last week while I was there doing that parenting seminar through the week there in Montserrat. And it was quite a conversation as we were talking to this matter. In fact, we were talking to this we were finishing the program on the Sabbath, and I was making two presentations, the one on parenting and the other one on the theological, biblical foundation of the family. And that presentation on the parenting opened like a can of worms as to the styles and so. But parenting is about outcome. And if we're not agreeing on that as to how do we order the life of the child, if both parents are not on the same wavelength, it could cause a lot of emotional distress and hurt in that family setting. For example, let us say, because you see, if parents are at tension and at loggerheads and are always having conflict, how do they manage their roles as parents? It could cause some real emotional distress and even lead to family dysfunction in this regard. And so parents have to be, it is not parental competition, but it's parental coalition. You want to get that right from the beginning. It is not parental competition, it is parental coalition. We have to agree as to how we're going to order the life of this child, because mommy can't be saying one thing and then daddy says one thing, or mommy says one, then daddy comes and overturns that. The child is confused as to who to obey, what the rules are. Are they consistent? They're consistent today, and then tomorrow you throw them out. These things could cause a lot of conflict in that situation. And I've seen families, parents fighting, and then the child or children knows whose corner to jump into, and it is divided, and we are living that way until the nest becomes empty, when they're all gone, and now the two of you are left there, and you have all had all of this tension all along the way. That is not a nice space to be in.
Well, Pastor, that is very useful information, a very accurate counsel. But I want to go back a little further, and I want to suggest that parenting really begins before the birth of the child. And
Yes.
I think a lot of people overlook that on a number of occasions, you know, and sadly, a lot of the children we have in the world today are unplanned. And so they happen by accident, you may want to say, without any proper preparation, so that individuals never set out to have children. They were engaged in sexual pleasure, and consequentially children came along. The challenge here is that the relational comfort between mommy and daddy, the emotional connection that they ought to have, and growing together as a couple and learning to problem solve and learning to treat other with respect and dignity, etc. If those things are not in place and a child comes as a result of maybe carelessness, unprotected sex, or whatever the case may be, and you're ill prepared to deal with your own personal issues, you are going to be impacting the child. I want to make the point very clearly that children learn by observation. A lot of times we think they are not paying attention. You know, I mean, in the first 6 months to 2 years of a child's life, that's when the child is learning the most. And we're told that 2/3 of the character of the child is formed by age 2. So that we must not take for granted the observation atmosphere. When they look and see how mommy relates to daddy, how they are expressing affections or lack of to each other, all these things are shaping the character of the child. And so it's important to not just have children, but plan for children.
Yeah, and that's a very significant point that you have just established there, Dr. Greene, because if you really do that, you are really starting off with a trial and error approach instead of having the knowledge and the skills, because marriages, relationship just don't succeed in love alone. You also have to have skills, and parenting skill is one of them. And if you, and you rightly said, we learn that from our family of origin, from our family of orientation, because if just the way we were parented, that's the same way we will parent our children. If we did not get the skill or the education to do differently, because patterns tend to persist. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Family, that's what he says. When we parent our children, we parent our grandchildren at the same time, because patterns tend to persist. And so we don't want to start at trial and error. But going back to that situation, I was saying that the conflict could develop depending on the style, because I was living in a neighborhood, and my next door neighbor had a parent, and I used to be always talking to them, but they had conflicting parenting style. The woman, the mother, she was authoritative, which is the recommended style, but the father, he was 100% authoritarian. That serious conflicts every day or every other day as to how
But let's pass the Adams. Let's make sure that our listeners and viewers understand the terminology that we're using there. Authoritative versus authoritarian. And it's a very important distinction, and we want to make sure that you get what we're saying here. Because on the one hand, when you're authoritarian, you are like a dictator. You know, you set the rules, you determine what happens, nobody asks for
questions, right?
You are the boss, and you give the final.
Do as I say.
You give the orders, as you say, do as I say. And and the child ends up fearing you and sees you as this slave master who is pushing him or her around, right? As opposed to authoritative, and you can speak to authoritative.
Yeah, the authoritative is where there is dialogue, there is openness, and there are expectations, there's communication, there's a cordial relationship between parent and child or children, but the lines of authority is clearly drawn and established, right? In that system, there's fairness. Children are allowed even to be a part of the rule setting. so that if there are consequences when the rules are broken, then they were part of the process once they've reached the age of maturity to be involved in that process, right? So there's that warmth, there's that openness, and that's such a blessing and a benefit. Even if you have two different styles, well, we're not going to talk to the other styles, but I just mentioned those two as the examples, as we say there, and that was causing quite some tension and some conflict in that household that I know. You know, and it really affected the children in very significant ways. The authoritarian model is not recommended. If you want to raise a delinquent, then go with that model. The authoritative model is the one that produces the best outcome. So if one has that problem, that weakness, then he or she has to learn and accommodate to the best method, because at the bottom line, parenting is about outcome. It's character formation, as you rightly said. By age 3, more than 87% of the child's personality is already formed. By the time they reach age 7, the character is already set. And so you can't afford to be fighting as parents, having these conflicting parenting styles, immature abilities, because you're starting with a trial and error and you don't know what to do. And it's a biblical principle. Manoah did ask when the angel appeared, how should we order the life of this child? You know, and then we have the age-long principle in Proverbs 22, train up the child in the way that he or she should go. And so parents have to be on the same wavelength, right? And so our parenting ability may differ as far as the east is from the west. If that's the case, we've got to get help to come to a position of synergy where we are both on the same wavelength and we can make the best outcome performing our tasks as parents.
And when you have a situation like this, it requires a certain degree of humility to say, hey, listen, we are clashing here. We are having some challenges here. If in your marital preparation, you did not address this issue, and you now have a child and realize that it is creating a challenge, the sensible thing to do is to, sit down and say, we are butting heads. We need to look at this carefully. And it is, earlier, we spoke about baggage, We spoke about baggage, and that's so very important, because it is going to require you going back to see what you brought to the marriage from your family of origin. And you may, as you look at your baggage, realize, this is the method that my parents use all the time. And a good thing would be to search yourself honestly and ask, how did I feel as a child growing up in that system? And, if your parents were authoritarian and you realize that you were afraid of them, you were cringing when the door opens and daddy's coming home, etc., then you should be able to say, this is not good. But if that's all you know, that's all you know. It is going to require some humility and some openness for your spouse now to say, well, I have a different method. And you may realize that, hey, let's get some professional guidance on this if it requires that. Because as you have been emphasizing in this discussion, Pastor Adams, that parenting is about outcomes. I used a quotation last night in my presentation from Neil Postman. He says, children are living messages we send to a future we will not see.
Right.
And so you need to be able to appreciate, and you also quoted that we are, when we parent, we are from Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families, that when we parent, we are parenting our grandchildren as well, because the patterns persist. And this is the point. So you have to determine, what kind of child do I want this person to grow up to be? When I'm dead and gone, what kind of heritage do I want them to carry on? And these are important things that you cannot afford to overlook. Hence, you can't be butting heads when it comes to parenting.
Right. And I would like to give examples from my experience over the years, they say 33 years. I've been in dealing with the family life education and all of these things. I would like to go and to give it, because it's, you know, sometimes when we talk, people think, oh, you're just talking theory. But I just like to also give the practical examples as I encounter people. And I know this particular young man, and here was a situation where the parents were fighting and all of this, and the father was the one that was really authoritarian, and he used to tell this boy all of these harsh, demeaning things. But the boy defied the odds. Because remember, I tell you, I said when we use that style, what the outcome could be. The boy defied the odds and became a success story. In fact, he became a doctor, a PhD. And at age 40, while he's writing his autobiography, he wrote in his autobiography that at such and such an age, his father told him that he would never amount to anything. I'm telling you that these things follow, or as you rightly said when you quoted from the author, the source, that, and I would want to get that quote from you that you used last night in your presentation. So we are looking at the far-reaching consequences. So we're discussing parental ability and the conflicting styles and methods that we bring, and how far-reaching, as you have used that quote, and that experience came back to my mind. Yes, this was a successful young man, but he remembers what his father said to him at this and this point of his life. And he wrote that in his autobiography.
I mean, we thank God for his grace, you know, and that
Yes.
in spite of some of the imperfections in our past, we are able to overcome them. And that's what we want to say to our married folks listening to us today. If one of you, we don't want to miss the point, if one of you has a parenting style that is different from the other, and it is creating conflicts in the relationship, it is something you need to be able to address. And we are saying that you want to accept reality, accept the fact that, hey, this is how it is. We are challenging this area. Accept reality about yourself and your spouse, because unless you humble yourself to that particular point, you are going to find resolving it a challenge, right? Now, our time has kind of run away from us, Pastor Adams.
Already.
Yes, already.
I tell you, man.
You know, yeah, people say, you know, we need to extend it, but we want to give it in short portions so you can digest it. If you eat too much food at one time, you will get indigestion. So
yeah, maybe the shorter version is the better thing, because yes, if you give too much at the time, people may not assimilate all that you say. Right.
So next week we're going to touch the whole concept of emotional problems from past, and that in itself is an interesting discussion. So we are encouraging you to keep listening to Marriage Encounter. You can go on Second Advent's website and replay the past episodes so that you and your spouse can listen together. And please remember to send your questions and comments to us, marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. That's our email address, marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. That's all the time we have for today, but we will be back next week again when we continue this very intriguing discussion. So until next week, same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.